I've told this story maybe 40 times now, to my sister, to the ladies at my book club, to a man on a plane who didn't ask. And every single time I get to the same part and my voice does this little thing. It catches. Because I still can't fully explain what I saw that afternoon outside those tall black gates. A grown man, a soldier, a colonel with more medals on his chest than I have years on this earth, and he was stopped, completely stopped, not by a gun, not by a shout, by a 19-year-old boy who never even looked him in the eye. Let me back up. My name is Marlene. I'm 63, or I was that summer. Retired third-grade teacher from a little town outside Dayton, Ohio, the kind of place where the biggest news all year is the county fair. My husband Ray passed 4 years before this trip. Heart in his sleep. Kind way to go, everybody said, and I suppose they were right, but nobody warns you how loud a house gets after. So that's why I went to London. Ray and I had always talked about it. One day, he'd say, we'll go see the Queen's Guards, Marley, the ones in the funny hats. He called them funny hats right up until the end. I don't know why that stuck with me. It just did. I finally booked it that July. Alone. 17 days. Everyone told me I was brave. I didn't feel brave. I felt like a woman running out of one days. Now, the morning it happened. It was hot. I want you to understand that because everyone pictures London as gray and drizzly, and it can be, but not that week. That week it was the kind of heat that makes the air feel thick, like walking through warm soup. My blouse was stuck to my back before I even got off the tube. The English weren't handling it well. You could tell. There are people built for cardigans, bless them, and here they were, red-faced and fanning themselves with tourist maps. I got to Buckingham Palace around 10 in the morning. Wanted a good spot for the changing of the guard. And let me tell you, good spot is a joke because there were already hundreds of people, maybe more, packed up against those gold-tipped railings 3 and 4 deep. I found a place near the corner, not perfect, but I could see the forecourt, that big stone courtyard behind the gates where the guards stand, and I could see one of them, right there, close actually, closer than I expected. He was standing in one of those little sentry boxes. You know the ones, black and red like a tall doll's house, and the guard himself. Well, he was exactly like Ray always said, the tall bearskin hat, the red tunic, buttons like little suns in that sun, rifle held perfectly still against his shoulder. Not a twitch, not a blink I could catch. I stood there a good while just looking at him. Everybody does. You can't help it. Kids were making faces at him. A teenage boy was doing a whole dance to try and crack him. Nothing. The man might as well have been carved out of the same stone as the palace. And in that heat, God, I remember thinking that poor boy is cooking alive inside that wool and fur, and he won't so much as wipe his own forehead. There was sweat coming down the side of his face. I watched one bead of it roll all the way from his temple to his jaw. He didn't move. I thought that was the most impressive thing I'd see all day. I had no idea. Now let me tell you about the Americans. They arrived maybe 20 minutes after me. You could hear them before you saw them. That's not me being mean about my own countrymen. I'm one of them. I know exactly how loud we get, especially abroad, especially in a group. It was a family, I think, but there was one man at the center of it who was clearly in charge. And I mean in charge. The whole group orbited him. He was in uniform. Dress uniform, the fancy kind. U.S. military. I'm no expert on ranks, I'll be honest, but he had those silver birds on his shoulders, and later I learned that means colonel. A full colonel. He was maybe 55, silver at the temples, jaw like a shovel, the sort of man who has clearly spent his whole life being obeyed the second he opens his mouth. I'll call him Colonel Halloran because that's more or less what his wife kept calling him. Dwight. Dwight over here. Dwight, get a picture. Now, I want to be fair to the man. I do. Because I've thought about him a lot since, and I don't think he woke up that morning planning to make a fool of himself in front of a foreign palace. I think he was just a man who'd been the biggest thing in every room for 30 years, and he didn't know how to be anything else. But Lord, was he loud. He pushed his way up to the railings like the crowd was supposed to part for him, and I watched people give way, actually give way, because he had that air. The uniform helped. A man in that much brass, people assume he belongs at the front. His family got their spot, right near me, and the colonel stood there, hands on his hips, looking at the guard in the sentry box, and I could see something building in his face. I didn't know what yet, but I recognized the look. I'd seen it on the faces of certain parents at parent-teacher night. The look of a man who has decided that the rules being followed here are, frankly, beneath his personal attention. "Would you look at that?" he said, to no one, to everyone. "Poor kid's melting. Somebody ought to give that boy some water." Which, okay, that's not a crazy thing to say. It was hot. I'd thought the same thing myself. But there was a tone under it, like he was already annoyed on the guard's behalf, in a way that had nothing to do with the guard and everything to do with himself. His wife said something. He waved her off. And then the colonel raised his voice, aimed it right through those gates at the young man in the red coat, and said, "Son, you all right in there? You need a break, you take one. Don't let 'em keep you standing out here like this." Nothing, of course nothing. The guard didn't so much as flicker. Now most people would take that. Most people would feel a little silly, having shouted at a wall, and they'd go quiet and take their photo and move on. Not Colonel Halloran. I watched his jaw tighten, because, and this is the thing, this is the whole thing, he wasn't used to being ignored. And to a man like that, being ignored isn't nothing. Being ignored is a challenge. "Hey," he said louder, "I'm talking to you." A few people around us turned. There's a particular feeling in a crowd when it starts to sense that something's about to go wrong, a kind of held breath. You felt it. You know exactly what I mean. The chatter drops a notch. Heads turn without seeming to turn. The guard stayed a statue. And I remember thinking, plain as anything, "Sir, please, please just let it go." He did not let it go. Here's what I need you to picture. This American colonel, chest full of medals, a man who has probably given orders that moved thousands of men across the world. He is looking at a 19-year-old British soldier standing at his post, and somewhere in that sun-baked, jet-lagged, overconfident head of his, a decision is forming. He has decided that this young man is being mistreated, that the boy is trapped by some silly foreign tradition, and that he, Colonel Dwight Halloran of the United States military, is going to fix it. You could see the whole thing arrive in his face. "This is ridiculous," he said, and now he was saying it to the crowd, playing to us, the way a certain kind of man always plays to a crowd when he's about to do something he'd never do alone. It's 90 degrees. They've got this kid standing at attention like it's a museum piece. Somebody in charge here. His wife, Dwight. "No, I'm serious, Carol. This isn't right." And then he did the thing. He stepped up to the gate, right up to it, put his hand on the black iron. I saw his class ring clink against it, and he leaned in toward the guard, and in this big, warm, commanding voice, the voice of a man who has never once in his life doubted that he'd be listened to, he said, "Soldier, at ease. That's an order. Stand down and get yourself some shade. Nobody's gonna fault you for it. I've got rank, I'll take responsibility." I swear to you, the whole corner of that crowd went dead silent. Because, do you understand what he'd just done? He tried to give a British Royal Guard an order, an American officer, standing outside Buckingham Palace. He'd looked at a soldier of the British Army on British soil, guarding the home of the British Crown, and he tried to command him like the boy was one of his own. A woman next to me, English, older than me, put her hand over her mouth. And I looked at the guard. Now I need to slow down here, because this is the part my voice always catches on. For 1 second, just one, I thought the young man hadn't heard him, because he didn't react at all, not a flinch. His eyes, which I could just see under the lip of that enormous hat, stayed fixed on some point straight ahead, some point 1,000 miles away. But then I saw it. His jaw, there was the smallest movement in his jaw, not a flinch, the opposite of a flinch, a kind of setting, like a man planting his feet without moving his feet, like something inside him had just quietly, completely locked into place. And I understood, watching that tiny thing, that the colonel had made a terrible mistake. Not a dangerous one, not a violent one, but the kind of mistake a proud man spends the rest of his life trying to forget. Because this boy was not going to move. This boy was not going to break. And whatever happened in the next few minutes, it was going to be the colonel who bent, not the guard, never the guard. The heat pressed down. Somewhere behind us a baby started to cry. A pigeon landed on the railing and nobody shot it. Everyone was just waiting. And Colonel Halloran, God help him, still didn't understand what he was up against. He rattled the gate, actually rattled it, this grown man, this decorated officer, shaking a piece of iron like a boy who wants a dog to come to the fence. Hey, I know you can hear me. And that's when it started to turn, because up until then the crowd had been embarrassed for him. You could feel it, that cringe, but now something else was creeping in. Now people were getting angry. The English are polite, painfully polite. They will queue in the rain for an hour and thank you for the privilege. But there's a line, and this man was standing on it with both feet. You don't shake the gate at the palace. You don't order their soldiers about. There are things you simply do not do, and he was doing all of them at once, in a foreign uniform, loudly in the heat. The old English woman beside me lowered her hand from her mouth, and under her breath, so soft I almost missed it, she said, "He hasn't the faintest idea, has he?" I said, "No, ma'am, I don't think he does." She looked at me. I think she clocked my accent, realized I was American too, and instead of the cold look I braced for, she just gave me this small, sad, knowing little smile. Like, well, not your fault, love. And then she nodded toward the forecourt. "Watch the boy," she said. "Not the fool, watch the boy." So I did. I stopped looking at Colonel Halloran, red-faced and rattling that gate, and I looked at the young man in the sentry box. And I have never in my life watched anyone so hard. He was so still. But it wasn't the stillness of before, the tourist Joe stillness, the make faces and he won't crack stillness. This was different. This was a stillness with weight in it, a stillness that was doing something. He was holding his post, and I finally truly understood what that phrase meant. Not standing there. Holding. Like the post was a thing that could be dropped, and he had decided it would not be dropped, not by heat, not by a shouting stranger, not by anything short of the orders of the only people on this earth whose orders he answered to. And the colonel wasn't one of them. Behind me the crowd kept thickening. Phones were up now, dozens of them, because everyone could feel it that we were all standing at the edge of a moment, the kind you tell people about later, the kind where you say I was there. I didn't have my phone up. I want to tell you that was some noble choice, that I wanted to just be present. Truth is I forgot I had one. I couldn't take my eyes off that boy. Colonel Halloran stepped back from the gate, and for one hopeful second I thought, oh thank God he's done, he's giving up. He wasn't giving up. He was looking for a way in. His eyes went down the railing, toward the spot where the guard's path runs, where they do that slow march, and I realized with a cold drop in my stomach that the man was actually looking for a gap, a way to get closer, a way to close the distance to the boy he decided to rescue, whether the boy wanted rescuing or not. "Dwight," his wife's voice was different now, not scolding, scared. "Dwight, that's enough, people are starring. Let 'em stare." And he started walking, along the railing toward the gap. That's when I saw the two policemen for the first time. They'd been there the whole while, I'm sure. There are always police near the palace, you just don't notice them, they blend into the scenery like the pigeons. But now they peeled off from wherever they'd been standing and they started moving. Not running, not shouting, just moving, unhurried, certain. The way people move when they've done a thing 100 times and know exactly how it goes. One of them was young. One of them was older, heavyset, with the kind of calm that comes from years. And it was the older one who angled himself, easy as anything, right into the colonel's path. "Sir, just that, sir, if I could have a word." And Colonel Halloran, this is the part where I started to feel almost sorry for him. Colonel Halloran turned on the policeman with that same voice he'd used on the guard, that big brass everyone listens to me voice, and he said, "You people are gonna leave that kid out here to pass out in this heat. That's your idea of tradition." The policeman didn't blink, didn't rise to it. He just said in that flat, patient, deeply British way, "The soldier's quite all right, sir. He's very well looked after. Now I'm going to have to ask you to step back from the railing. I outrank half the men you'll meet in your—" "Not here you don't, sir." And oh, the way the crowd reacted to that. It wasn't a cheer. The English don't cheer a thing like that. It was quieter and better than a cheer. It was a ripple, a murmur, a dozen little exhaled sounds of yes, of finally, of quite right too. The old woman beside me made a small, satisfied noise in her throat like a cat. "Not here you don't." 4 words, and they landed on that colonel like a bucket of cold water. Because it was true, wasn't it? All that rank, all that brass, all those years of walking into rooms and watching them go quiet. None of it meant one thing here, not on this pavement, not in front of these gates. His authority stopped at the edge of that railing as surely as if it had hit a wall. For a second, Colonel Halloran didn't have anything to say. But I could see it wasn't over. I could see it in his face, the flush climbing up his neck, the humiliation turning, the way it does in a certain kind of man, from embarrassment into something harder. He'd been made small in front of a crowd, in front of his wife, in front of a foreign policeman and a boy in a fur hat. And men like that, when you make them small, they don't always shrink. Sometimes they swing. "You know what?" he said, and his voice had dropped, gone tight and low, and that was somehow worse than the shouting. "You know what? I'm gonna talk to that soldier, man to man, soldier to soldier, and there is not a thing wrong with that, and there is not a thing you can do about it." And he moved. Faster than a man his size should move, right for the gap in the railing, right for the forecourt, right for the boy in the red coat who had not, this entire time, moved a single muscle. The young policeman lunged. The crowd gasped a real gasp, the whole corner of it at once, this sharp collective intake of breath. And the guard came alive. I need you to understand what came alive means, because it wasn't what you'd think. He didn't yell, he didn't run, he didn't do anything wild. It was the opposite. It was the most controlled thing I have ever seen a human body do. There was a sound first. That's what hit before anything else. A single, enormous, cracking stamp, the guard's boot coming down on the stone so hard it echoed off the palace face, off the gold on the gates, off the whole square. A rifle shot of a sound. It cut clean through the crowd noise and the traffic and Colonel Halloran's tight little voice, and everything went silent. I felt it in my chest, genuinely. That stamp went through the pavement and up through my shoes, and I felt it behind my ribs. The colonel stopped. Not because anyone touched him. The young policeman was still a half step away, hand outstretched, hadn't reached him yet. Nobody laid a finger on that man. He stopped because that sound made him stop. Because some animal part of him, some old soldier part that all his years of brass couldn't override, heard that stamp and understood before his proud brain did. That was a warning, and it was meant for you. And then the guard moved. He came out of the sentry box in one motion, not fast, not frantic, but sharp, every angle of it precise as a blade. The rifle came off his shoulder and swung down and across his body, and his hands found it in the exact places his hands had found it 10,000 times before, and he brought it up in front of him, held across his chest, barrel to the sky. And he turned on the boy, on Colonel Halloran. I have to pause on his face. Because for 2 whole minutes I'd been watching this young man be a statue, and now, for the first time, I saw him be a person. And it wasn't rage. That's what I expected, some flash of anger, and there wasn't a drop of it. It was something colder and much, much bigger than anger. It was purpose. He looked at that colonel, finally looked at him, and there was nothing in his eyes but the job. No fear, no temper, no "I've had enough of you." Just a young man who had a duty, and a threat had come near his post, and every single thing he was, every hour of training, every ounce of who he decided to be, had narrowed down to one point. And then he spoke. I'd wondered the whole time what his voice would sound like. Silly thing to wonder. But you build a person up in your head when you watch them that long, and I'd built him quiet, gentle even, a shy country boy under the fur. His voice was not gentle. It came out of him like the stamp had one clean shot of sound, drilled flat and hard and loud enough to reach the back of the crowd, in that clipped, formal, army parade cadence that doesn't sound like talking at all. It sounds like a wall going up. Stand back. 2 words, that's all. But the way he said them, split down the middle with that hard space in between, each one landing like a separate blow, it stopped the whole square cold. Colonel Halloran flinched. This man who'd been ordering the boy around for 10 minutes, this man with the silver birds on his shoulders, he flinched like he'd been slapped. And the guard wasn't finished. He brought the rifle up into a position. I didn't have the word for it then. Someone told me later it's called the port, or the challenge, held ready across the body, and he took one step. One single deliberate step that put himself squarely between the gap in the railing and the palace behind him, planting himself, a body in a doorway. And he said in that same wall of sound voice, no louder and no softer, every word its own hammer. You will not approach this post. You will step back behind the line, now. Not please, not sir, not one soft edge on any of it. And here's the thing I keep coming back to, the thing I've turned over 100 times since. That young man was maybe 160 pounds. The colonel had 30 years and 40 pounds on him, and a chest full of medals from real wars, real danger, things this boy had probably only trained for. And it didn't matter, not even slightly. Because the guard wasn't standing there as 160 pounds of 19-year-old. He was standing there as the whole thing behind him. The palace. The crown. 300 years of men who'd stood on that exact stone and held that exact post and not moved for kings and not moved for storms and would not ever move for one loud American with hurt feelings. You could feel all of that in the 2 words, stand back, the whole weight of it pressed down into a boy's voice. And the colonel felt it too. I watched it hit him. I watched the exact second the man understood where he was standing. His mouth was still open. He'd been about to say something, some new demand, some now listen here, and it just stopped, died in his throat. His hand, which had been coming up to point a finger, dropped back to his side. Because there was nothing to argue with. That's what got him. A man like that lives on the argument, on the back and forth, on out-talking the other fellow until the other fellow gives up. And you cannot argue with a wall. The guard hadn't given him a single thing to push against. No insult to be offended by. No opening. Just a flat, immovable no, delivered by someone who plainly, obviously, was not going to bend 1 degree in any direction, not if they stood there till nightfall. The colonel had spent his whole life being the immovable thing in the room. And he just met something more immovable than he'd ever been. For a moment, and it felt long, it felt like a full minute, though it can't have been more than a few seconds, the 2 of them just stood there. The boy in the red coat, rifle up, jaw set, eyes locked forward. And the colonel, frozen, brass gleaming, absolutely nowhere to go. And then Colonel Dwight Halloran took a step back. Small one. Half a step, really. But everyone saw it. The whole corner of the crowd saw it, and there was that ripple again, that quiet English ripple of "there it is," and I felt the old woman beside me let out a breath she must have been holding a while. Then the older policeman was at his elbow. Perfect timing, they must be trained for it. That instinct for the exact second a man's fight has gone out of him, the second where he needs a way out that lets him keep a shred of himself. The policeman put a hand, not a grip, just a hand, light on the colonel's arm and said, very quietly now, just for him, "Come along, sir. Nothing more to do here. Let's get you back to your family." And the colonel went. That was the thing that stunned me most of all, honestly. He just went. All that noise, all that brass, all that I outrank half the men you'll meet, and in the end he turned and walked back to the railing like a scolded schoolboy, and the policeman walked beside him, and it was over. The guard held his position a moment longer, rifle up, watching, making sure. Only when the colonel was fully back behind the line, back with his wife, back in the crowd where he belonged, did the young man lower the weapon, bring it back to his shoulder, turn in that same crisp, blade-clean way and march the few steps back to his sentry box, and become a statue again. Like nothing had happened, like he hadn't, 40 seconds ago, stopped a decorated foreign colonel cold with 2 words and a look. His face went back to that 1,000-yard nothing. The sweat still rolled down his temple, his eyes fixed on that far-off point again. But it was different now, watching him. It would never be the same tourist show again, because now every single person in that crowd knew what was underneath the stillness. Now we all knew what that quiet was holding. But nobody clapped. I want to note that because in America somebody would have clapped and it would have been the wrong thing, and thank God nobody did. It was too big for clapping. What happened instead was better. The crowd sort of exhaled together. This long shared release of breath, hundreds of people who'd all been holding the same tension letting it go at the same moment. And then slowly the normal sounds came back. Traffic. A child asking a question. The shuffle of feet. Life resuming. The old woman beside me turned to me. Her eyes were bright. "Told you," she said. "Watch the boy." I laughed. It came out shaky. I realized my own eyes were wet and I hadn't even noticed. "You told me," I said. 19 if he's a day," she said, looking back at the sentry box, and there was something in her voice, something almost like pride, though she'd never met the boy and never would. "My father did that. Same regiment, could be, stood right there. He always said the trick of it wasn't the standing still. Any fool can stand still." She paused. "The trick was standing still when something in you wanted to move. That's the whole of it," he'd say. I didn't have anything to say to that. I just nodded. It felt true in a way I didn't have words for yet. But now the colonel. I kept an eye on him after because I couldn't help it. He'd retreated to his family, and his wife, Carol, had her hand on his back and she wasn't scolding him anymore. That's the part that surprised me. I'd expected her to lay into him and she didn't. She just kept her hand there on his back steady. Married a long time, those two. You could tell. She knew that what he needed right now wasn't a lecture. He'd gotten his lecture in 2 words from a boy young enough to be his grandson. And the colonel's face. I've thought about his face more than the guard's, honestly, in the years since. Because the guard did exactly what he was built to do, and it was magnificent, but it wasn't a surprise, not really. What the guard did was be himself, fully, at the moment it counted. The colonel's face was the surprise, because you could watch a whole life rearranging itself behind it. He wasn't red anymore. The flush had gone. He'd gone pale, actually, and quiet, and he was staring at the ground in front of him, and every few seconds his eyes would flick up toward the sentry box, toward the boy, and then drop again. Fast, like it hurt to look. And I recognized that too. God help me, I did. Because I'd felt a smaller version of it myself years ago, the day I truly understood that I'd been wrong about something I'd staked my whole pride on. That specific awful clarity when the story you've been telling yourself, "I'm the one in charge here, I'm the one who knows, I'm doing the right thing," just collapses all at once. And you see yourself from the outside for a second. You see what everyone else has been seeing. He'd thought he was rescuing that boy. He'd thought he was the hero of it, the seasoned officer, stepping in, cutting through the silly foreign fuss to help a suffering kid. That's the story he'd been living inside for those 10 minutes. And then the boy had turned around and shown him in 2 words that he'd never needed rescuing at all. That the boy wasn't trapped by the tradition. The boy was the tradition, chose it, carried it, was stronger inside it than the colonel had ever guessed. That the person who'd needed to be stopped, the person who'd been out of place and out of line and small, wasn't the guard. It was him. That's a hard thing to learn at 55. In public, in a foreign country, in front of your wife. I almost went over to him. Isn't that strange? This man I'd been silently furious at for 10 minutes, and now I had this ridiculous teacherly urge to go put a hand on his arm and tell him it was all right. Everybody makes a fool of themselves sometimes. The heat gets to people. I didn't. It wasn't my place, and he wouldn't have wanted it, and Carol had the situation handled. But I understood him. That's what I'm trying to say. By the end, I understood the both of them, the boy who held and the man who broke. And I don't think you can tell this story right if you make one of them all good and the other all bad. That's not how it was. That's not how people are. They left not long after, the colonel and his family. They didn't stay for the full changing of the guard, which was a shame, because it started maybe 15 minutes later and it was beautiful. All the pageantry of it, the band, the marching, the whole thing Ray had wanted us to see. But before they left, something happened that I've never forgotten. It was small. Almost nobody saw it, I think. I only saw it because I was watching. The colonel, walking away at the back of his little family group, he stopped, turned, looked back one more time at the boy in the sentry box. And he straightened up. Just for a second, pulled his shoulders back, lifted his chin, and I swear this is true, he gave the boy a small nod. Not a big showy thing, a tiny, private motion of the head, the kind of nod one soldier gives another. The guard didn't see it, couldn't have, he was locked forward, statue, still 1,000-yard stare. It wasn't for the guard, really. It was for himself. It was the colonel finding, at the very bottom of a bad afternoon, one small thing he could still do right. Acknowledge it. Acknowledge that he'd been bested, fair and square, by a better man in that moment, and take it like a soldier. I liked him more for that nod than I'd have liked him for anything else he could have done. Because any man can be right. Takes a real one to be wrong and own it, even quietly, even when nobody's watching. Then he turned and followed his family out toward the mall, and the London crowd swallowed them up, and I never saw Colonel Dwight Halloran again. I stayed, watched the whole ceremony, cried a little bit during it, though I couldn't have told you exactly why, some mix of Ray and the heat and the boy and the whole enormous, strange, beautiful morning. The band played and the guards marched and the sun beat down, and I stood there in the crowd, a widow from Ohio, thinking about my husband and his funny hats, and I felt closer to him in that moment than I'd felt in the 4 years since he'd gone. Afterward, when it had all wound down and the crowd started to thin, I found myself lingering, not ready to leave, and I ended up talking to a man near the railing, an older English gentleman, retired, who came to watch the guard most mornings, he said. Just like to. And I told him what I'd seen, the colonel, the whole thing, and he listened, nodding slowly, and when I finished he was quiet for a while. Then he said something I wrote down that very night in my little travel journal, so I'd get it exactly right, and I'll give it to you exactly as he said it in part 3, because it's the whole reason I still tell this story at all. But I'll tell you what he said first, the small version, because it stuck. They're not standing there to look pretty, you know, he said, nodding toward the boy. Everyone thinks it's for the tourists, the hats and all. It isn't, never was. And then he told me what it was actually for. So let me tell you about the old gentleman by the railing. His name was Edmund. He told me that later, once we'd been talking a while. Edmund. He had a cane he didn't really lean on, more just held, the way some men hold things to have something in their hands. Tweed jacket in that heat, if you can believe it. The English and their layers. And he had this face, long, lined, kind. The face of a man who'd seen a great deal and made his peace with most of it. He came most mornings, he said. Not everyone, but most, to watch the guard. Bit mad, isn't it, he said. An old fool like me, but I find it settles something. Come down, watch the boy stand his post, have my think, go home. Been doing it years now. I asked him why. I don't know what made me ask. Maybe because I just watched what I'd watched and I needed someone to help me hold it, help me understand the size of the thing I'd seen. And Edmund looked out at the sentry box, at the young man standing there in the punishing sun, and he was quiet for a good long moment. And then he told me. My son stood there, he said. I didn't say anything. You learn at my age, when a person is about to give you something, you just hold still and let them. Not that exact box, down the way at the old spot, but that post, that uniform, same as the lad there now. He turned the cane a quarter turn in his hands. 30-odd years ago now. He was 19 when he first stood it. Same as they all are, bobbies, really. You look at them in the hat and they seem 10 feet tall, but take the hat off and they're just boys. Boys who have decided to be something bigger than boys. He smiled a little at the ground. He's gone now, my David. Not nothing dramatic, don't look like that. Cancer few years back. 61 he was, had a good life, grandchildren. He'd have hated me telling a stranger he cried at films. Edmund laughed soft. But he did. Great soft article, my son. Cried at films, cried at weddings, cried when the dog died. And then he'd put that uniform on and stand out here for 2 hours in weather like this and not so much as blink. I said, how does a person do that? And this is the part I wrote down that night. This is the whole reason I still tell it. Edmund looked at me, and he said, You've got it backwards, love. Everyone does. You think the standing still is them shutting the feeling off, going cold, turning into a statue. He shook his head slowly. It's the opposite. The stillness isn't empty, it's full. It's the most feeling a man can hold without letting it move him. That's the whole art of it, not feeling nothing. Feeling everything, the heat, the ache, the fool shouting at your gate, the tourist making faces, the whole daft weight of it, feeling every bit of that, and choosing every second not to let it win. He tapped the cane once, gently on the pavement. My David told me that, when he was a young man just after he'd started. I asked him the same thing you asked me, how do you do it? And he thought about it and he said, Dad, it's not that I don't want to move. Course I want to move. I want to scratch my nose and wipe my face and tell the little sod pulling faces to shove off, same as anyone. And then he said, I've never forgotten it, he said. The point isn't that I don't feel it. The point is that I decide it doesn't get to run me. That's the job, that's the only job, to feel it all and stand anyway. Edmund looked back at the boy in the sentry box. That's what you watched today, he said. That colonel, I saw the whole business, I was right here, that colonel thought he was looking at a boy who'd been stripped of himself, made into a machine, trapped, and he wanted to free him. Kind of him in a daft way, I'll grant it, but he had it backwards, same as everyone. That boy isn't less of himself in that uniform, he's more. He's the most of himself he'll ever be. Every want, every ache, every ounce of temper, all of it, right there, held in 2 hands and not spilled. That's not a man who's been emptied out. That's a man who's completely full and won't let a drop go. And then he said the thing. The colonel came here thinking strength was the loud thing, the big voice, the medals, the ordering about. And a boy of 19 showed him in 2 words that the loud thing was never strength at all. It was just noise. The real strength was the quiet one, the still one, the one that doesn't need to be seen or heard or obeyed to be certain of itself. He nodded, mostly to himself. That's why I come, to remind myself. Old men forget. We start thinking strength is the noise we make. And then I come and watch the boy stand his post and I remember, no, the strongest thing in this whole square is the one that isn't moving. I have thought about that conversation more times than I could count. I've thought about it in doctors' waiting rooms and in the checkout line, and at 3 in the morning when the house is too quiet. Feel it all and stand anyway. I've thought about David. A man I never met, crying at films and standing statue, still at his post. I've thought about Edmund, coming down most mornings to watch a stranger's son stand where his own son once stood, holding a cane he doesn't lean on, having his think. And I've thought about the boy, the real one, the one I actually watched. I never learned his name. I want you to sit with that for a second because it matters. That whole enormous morning, that thing I've told 40 times, that thing that changed how I understand strength itself, and I don't know the name of the person at the center of it. Never will. He was on duty 2 hours, then some other boy took the post, and he went off and became a regular 19-year-old again, and he has no idea that a widow from Ohio thinks about him at 3 in the morning. He probably doesn't even remember it. That's the thing that gets me. To him it was Tuesday. Some loud tourist kicked off. He did what he was trained to do, handled it, forgot it by tea time. He has no notion that it was, for a whole crowd of strangers, one of those rare mornings where you actually get to see what a person is made of. He'll never know what he showed us. I want to tell you what I did with it. Because a story like this, if all you do is tell it, it's just a nice thing that happened. It has to change you, or it doesn't count. When I got home to Ohio, back to the Too Quiet house, I was different. Not overnight, but different. Because here's what I'd figured out, somewhere over the Atlantic, looking down at the dark water. My whole life I'd thought I was a quiet person because I was weak. Not brave enough to make noise. Not big enough to take up space. Ray was the loud one, the sure one, and I stood beside him, and when he died I thought, well, that's it, the strong one's gone, now it's just quiet little me rattling around. And that morning outside the palace showed me I'd had it backwards my whole life, same as the colonel, same as everyone. The quiet wasn't the weak thing. The quiet was where the strength lived. All those years I'd stood my own post raising kids, burying my parents, sitting up nights with 6 students who weren't even mine to worry about, holding a marriage together through the hard stretches, holding myself together after Ray, all those years of feeling everything and standing anyway. That wasn't weakness. That was the whole art of it. I'd been a guard my entire life and never once given myself credit for the standing. I started saying yes to things after that. Small things. Joined the book club. Took the trip to see my sister I'd been putting off. Learned to be alone in that house without the aloneness swallowing me because I finally understood that being still and being empty are not the same thing. You can be still and be completely full. Full of everything you've loved and lost and carried. And choose, every day, not to let it run you. Feel it all and stand anyway. A 19-year-old I'll never meet taught me that. Or maybe an old man in a tweed jacket taught me. Or his son, David, who cried at films. Or my Ray, who wanted to see the funny hats and never got to. I honestly can't tell you which of them it was anymore. Maybe all of them. Maybe that's how the important things get handed down. Not straight from one person to one person, but sideways, through strangers, across an ocean. From a boy who will never know he gave it to an old woman who will never forget she got it. I go back to that morning most when things are hard. When the diagnosis came, 2 years ago now, mine this time, and no, don't worry, I'm all right, they caught it. I'm still here to tell you the story when that came, and I sat in that cold little room and heard the word nobody wants to hear. I'll tell you where my mind went. It went to the boy in the sentry box. Not to God, though I made my peace with God after. Not to Ray, though he came later. First, before anything, it went to that red coat and that terrible sun and that cracking stamp of a boot on the stone. It went to feel it all and stand anyway. And I sat there in that cold room and I felt the fear rise up in me like the heat rose off that London pavement, and I thought, all right then. I know how to do this. I've been trained for this my whole life without knowing it. I feel every bit of this. And I am not going to let it run me. I held my post. I'm still holding it. So that's the story. That's the whole of it. The loud man and the quiet boy, and everything the loud man learned in 2 words on a hot morning outside a palace. People always ask me when I finish, what happened to the colonel? And the honest answer is I don't know. I never saw him again. For all I know, he flew home and never thought about it once. For all I know, he tells it too, at his own dinner tables, the day some British kid put him in his place. Though I suspect if he tells it different, the way we all soften the stories where we came off worst. But I like to think about that little nod he gave, walking away. That small private acknowledgement. Because that nod tells me he got at least some of it. That somewhere under all that brass and noise, there was a man who could recognize when he'd met something better than himself and tip his head to it. That's not nothing. That might be the most important thing he ever did, that nod, and he probably doesn't even remember doing it. And the boy. The boy is a man now, I suppose. It's been years. He'd be, mid-twenties by now, maybe older, out of the service most likely, off living some ordinary life somewhere. Wife maybe, kids maybe, a job, standing in his own checkout lines. And I hope, this is the thing I hope more than anything, I hope that somewhere in him, even if he's forgotten that exact Tuesday, even if the specific kernel is long gone from his memory, I hope the thing that made him able to do it is still in there, still holding. Because the world needs quiet, strong people more than it will ever need loud ones, and it almost never tells them so. Somebody should tell them so. That's what this whole story is, really. Me telling them so. A widow from Ohio saying it into the void, hopping some of it lands where it needs to. To the quiet ones, the still ones, the ones holding a post nobody sees, feeling every ounce of it and standing anyway. I saw you. One hot morning outside a palace, a whole crowd of us saw you. And we will not forget what you showed us about what it really means to be strong. Even if you never knew we were watching. Even if, to you, it was only Tuesday.